Hi there. Welcome back. I'm Pam and we're in my kitchen again where I share with you some of my favorite recipes or those that are most requested by my friends, family, and guests. Today I'd like to show you how I make Greek baklava. And I say Greek because my husband's grandmother, his yaya as Greek kids call their grandmothers, she taught me how to do quite a bit of Greek baking and cooking back in the 80s. And so this is a Greek version. There are people groups all over the Middle East that have their own versions of baklava. They put them together a little bit differently, layer it differently, use different nuts. But this is the Greek version. It's authentic and I think you're gonna like it, and I'm happy to share it with you. So the first thing that we're gonna do, we're gonna go over to the stove and we're going to make a simple syrup, which is poured over the baklava once it's finished baking. So we will start there and then we will start putting together the actual baklava. Alrighty. Alrighty, so we're at the stove and we've got sugar in a large saucepan and we're going to add water to that. And of course I'll give you the amounts on the recipe. We're going to take 2 cinnamon sticks. I break them in half, put them in there. Take several, maybe a dozen, whole cloves, and just drop them in. We're going to strain this stuff out eventually. The juice of half a lemon, and then just drop the other half in there. And about a 1/4 cup or so of honey. I just do a couple big globs. And we're going to put this on the heat. And bring it to a boil and let it cook for about 10 minutes. We just want the sugar to dissolve. And then we're going to take it off the heat and let it cool down. So our simple syrup is on the stove, simmering away for approximately 10 minutes. No more than that. Again, we just want to dissolve the sugar and cook it down just a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is take our bowl of ground nuts. What I did is I went to Costco and I bought their 3-pound bag of walnuts and I used about 2/3 of it. There's probably 8 or 9 cups in here. There's going to be leftover and there are uses for it, which I'll share with you later. But this is finely ground walnuts and it's very small, not big pieces. And we're going to add a cup of sugar and a couple teaspoons of cinnamon. This is a 1/2 teaspoon. It fits in the jar better. So 4 of these is what I'm looking for here. This is ground cloves. They're very pungent and they're yummy, but you don't want to use a whole lot. So I just put a few shakes in. And then we're just going to stir this up. The spices and the sugar mixed in. This is what we are going to be layering between our phyllo dough. Phyllo dough comes in a box like that in the freezer section at the grocery store next to the puff pastry and the desserts and whatnot. And it might not look exactly like that. There's different brands, and all I would recommend to you is getting a box that's fresh. Check the date and leave it in your freezer until you're ready to use it. Take it out the night before, put it in your refrigerator and let it thaw slowly. Then put it on your counter about 2 hours before you're actually going to put your baklava together. These steps are very important. Phyllo is a very thin, papery dough, and if you let it dry out or thaw it inappropriately, it will give you a headache and you won't be happy. And those things will happen because not every package of phyllo is perfect, I can promise you. But I will show you what to do. So this is mixed up nicely. Now what you want to do, put a little in your hand, taste it. I know you don't really know what it's supposed to taste like, but you want to taste the spices a little bit. smells and tastes good to me. Grandma used to do that, so I always do it. But about 2 teaspoons, 2.5 of cinnamon to this much ground walnuts, and several shakes of the cloves. Okay, so we're going to put that aside. Again, here's our phyllo. This package comes with 2. We're only going to use 1 right now. You take it out of the little plastic wrap, and then you unroll it. I leave it on the counter. On the plastic that it's wrapped in. This feels really nice and fresh. It's a little bit cracked on the ends. You're going to have that. Let's move it over. I like this brand because it fits the pan almost perfectly. So we lay it there. Now, take a clean, damp dish towel, and when you're not actively working with your phyllo, cover it, because it will dry out and it will crack everywhere. So we've got our phyllo opened up, laid out. We didn't have to cut it because I bought this brand, which was a perfect size. But if you buy a piece and it doesn't fit, lay your pan down and just trim off the length that you don't need. Okay, that's covered. I'm going to turn off our syrup. It's done. It can just sit there and cool down. It's very important when you're making baklava. Your syrup has to be completely cool when you pour it over your hot baklava. Now, I usually make it the night before and then just leave it on the stove covered, and it's cool the next morning when I start my recipe. You can also cook your baklava and let it cool down and then make your syrup and pour your hot syrup on your cooled baklava. One has to be hot and one has to be cold. If you just remember that, you'll be successful. Okay, so this is 2 sticks of unsalted butter. Very important. You do not want to use salted butter with baklava. And I just wipe the bottom of the pan down to grease it just a bit. And then I pull this back. We are going to put about 8 layers down with butter in between each layer. And you can see that's not perfect. It's got some holes in it. But, and as a matter of fact, that just grabbed the pan and I couldn't move it. So I'm just going to leave it right there. But anyway, you take your butter and do this, drizzle it around. Don't saturate it, just get a light coating. I'm going to take another one. It's good to drape it over the pan and then just alrighty. And we're just going to layer butter and phyllo 8 times. And this is going to be the bottom crust. And it's important that you put butter between these layers, otherwise it's not going to be crispy and you will wind up with a rather dry bottom. So yeah, just do this. I was going to tell you a funny little story. So my husband's grandmother, I told you she's Greek, and she shared a lot of her recipes with me, but I know that you know, there are some women, herself included, that don't like to share some of their more treasured family recipes. And you wouldn't think within a family that would be a problem, but my sister-in-law told me that she was cooking with Grandma one time, and she wanted to learn how to make some kind of a cookie recipe or something. I don't remember. I think she was in high school, my sister-in-law. And Grandma asked her to go over to the other side of the kitchen and get a particular ingredient. And my sister-in-law said that while she was over there, she looked over her shoulder and Grandma was sneaking in a secret ingredient in the recipe that she didn't want to tell her granddaughter about. And, you know, some of these recipes are kept rather secretive, I know. But Grandma's not here anymore, and I really don't think she'd mind. If she were here, I'd have her right here next to me, and she'd probably be thrilled to death to be doing this with me. So I think it's okay that I'm sharing her recipe. Okay, anybody know where we're at? I haven't been counting, but that's okay. I'm going to do a couple more. It doesn't really matter. Just get several. At least a half a dozen. 6 to 8. And we're just buttering in between. Okay, I'm going to do one more. And just lay them down. And if you get some that are cracked and not very pretty, just piece it together. If it rips in half, put it down, then put the other half. This fits the pan pretty well, so I'm not having to trim anything. But if it doesn't fit your pan, like I said, trim it ahead of time. Just lay your pan on the phyllo and cut it. Okay, so I've got my bottom pieces done. I'm going to cover this for just a little bit. This is my bowl of nuts, walnuts. I'm going to get rid of this and just grab a couple of handfuls and spread it around, and then just kind of evenly distribute it. You don't need every single little square inch of phyllo covered with nuts. So looks like that. And now we're going to take another piece of phyllo dough and lay it on top of the nuts. Take our butter. Now, this is sitting on chopped nuts instead of a sticky adhesive piece of phyllo with butter on it. So now you kind of have to be a little more careful when you're spreading your butter, because it'll just lift it right up. Okay, so now the process here is, like I said, grab a couple of handfuls of nuts and spread them around. Might grab a few more, fill in a few bald spots, but it looks kind of like that. And then take another piece of phyllo, and you just keep doing this. And I don't have an amount, how many I do, but I like to fill my pan about halfway. If your phyllo is too tall, or if your baklava is too tall, it tends to topple. But about halfway up the pan, so when you get about that far up, you just stop, and then you add your top layers to finish it off. So I'm just going to keep layering phyllo, butter, and nuts. As you can see right here, this sheet of phyllo is probably maybe an inch too long. And I just fold it over, and then on the other side, next time I fold it on the other side, it won't make it wonky at all. It'll be fine. But if you're any more than an inch off, go ahead and cut it. So there. Now, something I'm going to tell you that's very important. Once you get 3 or 4 layers going of this, and you've got it spread around, press on it. This is going to stick it all together. So just press on it every time. Like I said, the first couple times you don't need to do it, but once you get 3 or 4 layers down, press on it, then add another layer of phyllo. More butter, more nuts, then press on it, and then add more phyllo, butter, nuts, press on it, just press it down so that the finished product has been pressed together and it just holds together better. Okay, so I've got all my layers, and I have started putting my top layers on with no nuts in between, just phyllo and butter. And we're going to do about 8 layers, just like we did on the bottom. You'll notice I have nuts left over. I always like to make more than I need because these are really yummy on plain yogurt. Sprinkle those nuts on plain yogurt and then drizzle some honey on top and you've got a really nice breakfast. Now, the top, it's important to really try to get some perfect pieces of phyllo on the top. If your phyllo is cracking, you don't want to use those on top if you can help it. If that's all you have, don't worry about it. I actually opened the second package because the way they're packaging it now, there's fewer in each package. If you buy one with one solid roll, you'll get the same amount only in one roll, but they've broken this one up into two. So anyway, I opened the second package and because I needed it for the top, and I went about halfway up with my nut, phyllo, and butter mixture. And now I'm just finishing the top. And you can roll this phyllo back up and put it in the freezer and use it next time or for something else. There's a few recipes out there with phyllo, asking for phyllo. So, okay, I'm going to do one more. So what's going to happen now, after I finish this off, I'm going to put it in the refrigerator for about an hour. You don't have to do this, but I like to do it. Grandma told me it was a good idea. And what happens is the butter gets hard, and then it makes it so much easier to cut because we're going to cut this before we bake it. If we forgot and didn't cut it, it would crack all over the place after it was baked, and it wouldn't be pretty. I've got nuts all over. I lay down paper towels to collect the drips and, but it's fine. You make a little bit of a mess. So there we are. We have our bottom layers of phyllo and butter. Then we've layered in between phyllo, butter, and nuts. And then we finished off the top as we did the bottom. About 8 layers of butter and phyllo. This is my leftover. I'm going to just roll it back up, and you can put it back in the box and freeze it. I've got some phyllo over here that I'm going to show you later what happens when it dries out and why you want to always cover it. So this is going to go in my refrigerator. It's going to chill for an hour. We will come back. I will show you how we cut it. We'll bake it. We'll add the syrup and finish the recipe. See you in a little while. Our baklava has been in the refrigerator for like an hour and a half, actually. Doesn't matter how long you leave it in there, but just let the butter get really firm. Now we're going to cut it. And I can tell you, I can get really weirded out over cutting this stuff. I like every piece to look absolutely perfect. It's not important that it does. It's just the way I like it. But today we're just going to cut squares, and you can use a ruler and measure yours off and be real precise and have it look really pretty if that's what's important to you. And if it's not, don't worry about it. Just keep in mind, you do not want really big pieces. This is rich, and you really just need little triangles, diamonds, or squares. I think squares are kind of bulky looking, so cut a square in half and make a triangle or do diamonds is what I would recommend. So I'm going to go ahead and just start cutting. The butter is cold, so the phyllo isn't going to tear on me. There's always a chance, that it still will, but for the most part it doesn't. And you get a real sharp knife, sharpen your knife before you do this. Be sure that you cut all the way through to the bottom. If you don't, you're going to be frustrated when you try to take it out of the pan. So what I'm going to do today, I'm just cutting squares. And then I'm going to cut those squares in half and make triangles. Just remember, you can do whatever you want, just don't make them too big. Baklava is really rich. You might need, once you've cut down one side and you're going down the other like I am, you may need to hold your hand on the top pieces because they are going to start popping up a bit. If you feel like you need to put it back in the fridge, but if it's not too hot in your house and you work at a good rate, you shouldn't have too much trouble. Now I'm going to cut down the middle. Jim's grandma always used to put a fresh, or not fresh, dried clove in each piece, just to kind of hold down the topping. It's not necessary. Most people don't do it. I've really never seen that done, but she always did. And so once I get this cut, I am going to take the time to put a whole clove in the top of each piece. I think it's pretty for presentation purposes and looks a little more finished. You can actually eat the top of that clove, the top piece of it. That's what you get in the jar when you buy it. It's a fine little clove. And you know, something else, if you bake it, when you bake it, not if you bake it, of course you're going to bake it. After it's cooled and you're removing it from the pan, it doesn't hurt to run a knife along all the seams again, because almost every time I make this, I'll start to take it out of the pan and I'll find that I still need to do a little cutting, even though I've cut carefully. So just try to get your lines to match up here. I'm not going straight across this way because it tends to pull the dough a little more into one continuous line, but they match up. Okay. Like I said, I think this part's the most tedious of making baklava, and it's really not difficult. Okay, those square pieces are a little odd, so I'm just going to leave them because they're smaller. So now I have my cloves, and like I said, you don't have to do this, but I like to. I'm going to put a clove on top of each one, and make sure each of your cloves has a little bud on the top, because if it doesn't, just toss it. It's useless. Well, it's not useless. It holds the piece down, which is kind of the purpose here, but it's missing something. It doesn't have its little spice on top. My husband actually chews these things and eats them, but I think they're awfully hard. Anyway, as you can see, I'm going to put a clove on top of each piece, and then I'm going to put it in my oven, and I'm going to bake it for approximately 45 minutes. It needs to come out very golden brown. Just a nice deep golden, and I'll show you what that looks like when it's done baking. Okay. The baklava has baked for about 45 minutes to an hour. I'm going to take it out of the oven. And as you can see, it's a nice golden brown color. And it was important to have really nice pieces of phyllo on the top. Otherwise, we would have had a lot of cracked pieces. So this looks really nice. We were careful to cover the top with solid pieces. When you're working on this, down below, it's fine. If the pieces underneath need to be pieced together, if your phyllo's not perfect, don't get frustrated. Okay, so this is really hot, and this is cooled to room temperature. This is our simple syrup. And I've strained it. I've taken out the lemon and the cloves and the cinnamon sticks. And we're just going to pour this on. And I don't know if you can hear this, but it is sizzling. Alrighty. Now, what's going to happen with this? It's floating. You know, I mean, there's so much syrup in here that some of these might even move up a little bit. This needs to sit here for several hours and just soak up the syrup in the layers of nuts and phyllo. What I do is I just leave it alone, and then before I go to bed tonight, if there's time, I mean, you want to give it a few hours just sitting like this. Unfortunately, when you make baklava, you cannot eat it the day you make it. You can't. So plan ahead. Anyway, so this is going to soak in. You'll see some of the syrup just disappear, but there's still going to be too much syrup to leave there. So what you're going to do, and I'd recommend doing it tomorrow when you get up, take out some corner pieces. So you have a section about like that, empty. Tip your pan. Let me grab something. Tip your pan and put something under the corner, a book, a pot holder, so that the syrup that's excess can drain down into that empty spot where you've removed the 2 or 3 pieces of baklava. Then you just spoon it out. You may spoon out as much as a cup of syrup, but we're going to let it soak like this all day. Tomorrow morning, I'll get up, I'll take some out, and those can be eaten. And then we'll start draining it. Drain it a good part of the day. It's a process, but it's worth it, I promise you. And I was going to tell you, I like to serve these in little cupcake papers. You know, just those little papers you put in your cupcake pan. This tends to be a little bit sticky, and so if you put each piece in a paper, it's really nice to serve it that way. Nobody gets sticky hands. Now I want to show you something else before we go. I don't know if you've noticed this pile. This is phyllo that I left out on the counter, and this is what happens to phyllo when you don't cover it. It just dries up, and so you have got to cover your phyllo when you're working with it. If you walk away and forget that, oh, I'll come back to this in half an hour, you'll wind up with something similar to that. So anyway, this is Greek baklava, thanks to my husband's grandmother. I hope you try it. It's not difficult, as you can see. It's just time consuming, and you need to practice patience because you can't eat it right away. So let me know if you try it, and I will see you next time. Bye.